Hello, abnormal students. How's everybody doing? All right. Plan for today is to finish up childhood disorders, and then you have your exam 3 to take. And I believe we were covering ADHD, and we had just finished talking about impulsivity. Does that sound about right during the last class? In order for a diagnosis to be there, again, this is more one of those long-term disorders that is evident in childhood and then tends to continue throughout life. You got to see the onset of the symptoms before the age of 12. We've talked about how you've got to have impairment in 2 or more settings, and usually that is considered the home setting and then oftentimes the school setting, but it could be other kinds of settings like seeing it in sports settings or things like that. And it's got to create significant impairment for it to be diagnosable. There are 2 types of ADHD, and why the DSM did this, I do not understand. We used to call it ADHD, and now it's ADHD primarily inattentive type, formerly known as ADD, which I like that term. I'm not sure why they needed to make it more complicated. And then ADHD primarily hyperactive type. So what the DSM-5 has done is they've made clinicians, when they make this diagnosis, determine which is more impairing for this individual. Is it more the inattentive symptoms that's the most impairing, or is it the hyperactivity, impulsivity symptoms that are the most impairing? Okay. Where in real life, it could be both of those things are creating significant amount of impairment. So again, why the DSM decided to do this in the version 5, I'm not quite sure. Okay, so I'll just kind of put that out there that I don't know if I totally agree with them doing that. Okay. We get a really interesting phenomenon here where we see this evident in about 3 to 5% of school children, but in some surveys of teachers, they think as many as 25% of children meet this diagnosis. And so that could mean a couple of different things if we start thinking critically about this. It could mean that what we are expecting in our educational system is not conducive to normal childhood levels of energy or normal childhood levels of their ability to pay attention for long periods of time. Okay. My bet would be now that a lot of kids are in virtual education and on Zoom and have either parents, guardians, grandparents, somebody kind of overseeing their online education, that we're seeing even more of this, because I think you all can understand that an attention span on Zoom is even different than an attention span in a live classroom where you've got like a real human being teacher in front of them speaking to them. Another thing that this could mean is that teachers struggle, particularly when they've got numerous children in the classroom, where individuals might be struggling with their energy level or inattention, that teachers perceive more subclinical levels of ADHD. We know in epidemiological studies where we look at the actual rates, we see this to be about 4 to 5 times more common in males than we see it in females. But because of that, parents and teachers want more of the diagnosis in males. And oftentimes girls or females who have this get overlooked, particularly if the girls are not engaging in any type of behavior problems. They're just zoned out and inattentive in the classroom, but they're not creating any trouble. Oftentimes those teachers would not suspect a diagnosis. And again, if they're well behaved at home, parents would not expect a diagnosis. And so we've got a little bit of a difference between how individuals who would get that child, say, to a pediatrician or get that child to a psychologist's office perceive those gender differences. Okay. When we look at causes, early on, the Feingold was the person that really believed in the Feingold diet. And the thought here was that ADHD was caused by kids consuming too much junk food and kids consuming too much sugar. Okay. And consuming simple carbohydrates or sugar is not healthy for anybody. But over time, as they did the scientific research, they found that there were lots of kids out there that were consuming a lot of sugar that weren't evidencing ADHD behavior. It's not the causal factor in this. Now, keep in mind that parents are counseled oftentimes when a child is given this diagnosis to try to help them engage in healthful eating in the home and for the child. Okay, but again, the sugar hypothesis did not pay off as being the causal factor here. Genetics, we definitely see ADHD running through families. Okay. And we tend to see, if it's more of an ADD presentation versus a hyperactivity impulsivity, you tend to see that running in the families also. Prenatal risks, we know very clearly when mom during her pregnancy is engaging in smoking, nowadays vaping probably fits in there, or engages in drug use. That child, assuming that child is a healthy birth, that child is a lot more likely to have a learning disability and ADHD than when moms do not smoke or use drugs during their pregnancy. Okay. You also tend to get moms who smoke or use drugs during their pregnancy also tend not to be exercising on a regular basis and tend not to be eating healthfully. Those unhealthy behaviors kind of, associate with one another, and women who are really tend to be healthy during their pregnancy tend to be healthy in multiple ways, exercising and oxygenating their blood flow and oxygenating that growing fetus, tend not to be smoking, tend not to be using drugs, tend to be eating healthfully. So we've got those factors there. And we know that most of when we do the neuropsych testing or we do the scanning, most of the dysfunction is in the frontal lobe. And I think you all know that the frontal lobe is developing for humans until mid to late 20s. Okay. Which is kind of why the frontal lobe is that higher level functioning, abstract functioning, executive functioning, is our ability to do things like think abstractly, our ability to process thoughts and feelings, our ability to plan and execute a plan, as well as the frontal lobe is the part of the brain that sort of is able to disinhibit. It's kind of like the brake linings of the brain. And sort of say, like, I was just on a Zoom meeting a few minutes ago, and we're kind of out here in the country, and a bunch of fire engines went by, and I couldn't help but go to the window and look at the fire engines, even though I was supposed to be in the meeting. And it's just because it's an unusual event around here. But a good frontal lobe ability to inhibit would have been like, Denise, stay at the computer and stay in this meeting. Don't pay attention to the fire engines. Okay. So does it make sense that some of what happens to some individuals is that they evidence more ADHD kind of dysfunction and behavior, but for some individuals that tends to mellow out in their 20s, 30s, 40s as the frontal lobe is fully matured. Other individuals, though, on the other hand, do not tend to age out of the ADHD diagnosis. Okay. So for some, the undeveloped frontal lobe just really adds to the ADHD. It's almost like a synergy. And for others, there's just enough ADHD there that when the frontal lobe gets fully developed, it tends to go away. Okay. And that underdeveloped frontal lobe is why, I mean, you all, you could go out and look at a playground of children. The younger that children are, the less control they've got over their behavior, right? And it kind of explains why younger people engage in more risky behavior than adults engage in risky behavior, because adults are more likely to go, oh, if I did that, I could get hurt, or if I did that, I could get in trouble, Or if I did that, I could hurt somebody else's feelings, that kind of thing. Any questions there? Okay. Okay, I have already preached a bit about how strongly psychologists feel that ADHD diagnoses should be made by psychologists and not made by parents, not made by school teachers, not made by pediatricians, even though pediatricians have really qualified medical diagnoses and medical treatments. And we call that neuropsychological testing. And it's the same kind of thing that we talked about when we were talking about diagnosing dementia, because the neuropsychological testing is going to test all of the brain's ability to function. And it's going to pick up on nuanced, small levels of impairment. Okay. And so here we would be looking with the neuropsych testing results at the brain's ability to attend and sustain attention, and the brain's ability to perform compared to other kids the same age and other kids the same biological sex. And the neuropsych testing is going to rule out other impairments. And I think I've already used as an example, like what if this child has hearing impairment, and so they're not paying attention because they can't hear well? What if they can't see well and they're not paying attention because they can't see? What if there are other issues that are masking themselves as ADHD? What if there's an intellectual disability? So this child isn't paying attention and is not keeping up in school because they have a lower IQ. As well as we know that about 30% of individuals with ADHD also have a diagnosable learning disability. And that child or that person is not going to succeed academically unless we know what the learning disability is. And then special education teachers know how to reroute and get around learning disabilities to help that child keep up with achievement compared to other children in the classrooms. And so if that child has, let's say, a reading disability, a spelling disability, a math disability, we're going to need to know that information to help that child succeed. It's not just taking care of the ADHD that is going to help with that. And then another thing that school psychologists and clinical psychologists who do these neuropsychological assessments, they also look at a child's intelligence, and then they look at the child's achievement in school, and they look to see if those things are comparable. Okay. In the olden days, the school and the clinical psychologists used to diagnose a learning disability if IQ was higher but achievement was lower and there was a big enough gap there. Nowadays, that's one way of kind of conceptualizing it, but there's more nuanced ways that they make the learning disability diagnoses. Another thing that is done is having parent, guardian, grandparent, whoever is the primary caregiver for the child, do ratings. And usually these are called the Connors ratings. And then having the teacher do ratings of the child's behavior. And it's the same kind of thing on the Connors. You would have kind of that normal bell curve, looking to see if their perception of that child's behavior is falling into inattention, falling into hyperactivity, falling into impulsivity, behaviors that are much worse than other children. And like we've said, school psychologists and clinical psychologists will oftentimes go to the home and observe the child's behavior in the home, go to the classroom and observe the child's behavior in the classroom. And I gave you an example during the last class how I would get called into the classroom to observe my children's behavior as if I wasn't believing that they were high energy in the classroom, because I saw them quite high energy in the home setting, you know. But I was always really good at working with the teachers and going, yes, we know. And yes, so here's what helps us at home. And yes, here's what we got to do. And yes, we keep them really active in sports. And, we had one teacher as an example that when this was my oldest son, and I remember thinking when she's complaining about my older son, and I was like, wait until you see what else I've hatched. Because you think this one's problematic. Boy, you should meet the youngest one. But anyways, my older son would get into trouble, and then she would deny him recess. He'd have to sit in the classroom and not be able to go out for recess. And again, with that teacher, I was like, lots of empathy to her. And it's like, oh, don't deny him recess. Let him get out there and run around and spaz out. He'll calm down. But she was afraid he'd get fired up and then wouldn't calm down. It's like, no, they need an outlet for that energy, and then they'll calm down. So anyways, lots and lots of, they grew into healthy young men. So got them out of that school system. Okay, so ADHD treatments, we do a lot of behavior modification. And one of the things that we want parents doing and we want teachers doing is, I call it the 80-20% rule. Kids with ADHD get a lot of punishment thrown at them. Okay. And the 80-20 rule is ideally 80% of the time, these kids are being provided with reinforcement. And only about 20% of the time are these kids being criticized. We definitely don't want them being yelled at or corrected in some way. So the 80-20 is, we want them getting lots of reinforcement. Even if it's the kind of thing where we're coaching a parent, that if the kids are able to ride in the car together and not touch one another and not fight, that they're getting praise for that. Thank you for being so well behaved on this trip. Thank you for sitting in your seat and working on your math homework for a half an hour. I'm really proud of you. Okay. Thank you for sitting through dinner without spilling your food or your drink, those kinds of things. Because again, that's the opposite of what these children naturally elicit. They elicit a lot of punishment. And again, we've even talked about the yelling, where a lot of times parents will raise their voice. Like, if you're not listening to, I'm going to raise my voice and then maybe you'll listen to me. We got to make sure that's not happening, because that's going to create a lot of tension and a lot of issues in the home. We also know that kids that get a lot of punishment thrown at them are going to have lower self-esteem. And when they have lower self-esteem, they're not going to try as hard. And if they're not trying as hard, they're not going to persevere in their learning. And we know that ADHD kids are a lot more likely to be risk takers, and particularly in their teen years, more likely to engage in risky behavior, as well as drink and use drugs. So it's a really bad combination when you get the ADHD and a lot of punishment and lower self-esteem. Okay. So again, the neuropsychologists, when they get in there, they do the testing, they're going to be looking at those things also. Okay. And then coaching parents and teachers in the behavior modification. What we also do with kids is we take this behavior modification, where it's all usually reinforcement punishment from others directed at the child, and we try to help that child engage in self-regulation. And there's a couple of different ways that we help that child with self-regulation. Mike and Baum, it was a psychologist who developed a self-regulation strategy of training the child how to talk to herself or himself to regulate behavior. And so an example would be, let's say you've been out on the playground running around and it's a hot day and the kid's thirsty, and they come back in and they're all allowed to line up at the water fountain and get some water before they go back in the classroom. That ADHD kid is likely going to be standing there. I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty. I want water, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty. They're likely to push somebody in front of them, butt in front of them, and engage in what could be some not so good social behavior. So Mike and Baum would help the child learn how to think and regulate behavior in that situation. So it'd be like, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty. Oh, look, I'm next in line. I'm getting there. Oh, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty. Oh, but I got to wait my turn. I'm thirsty, I'm thirsty. Oh, good, she's done. Now I can get my water. Okay. So helping them kind of talk and regulate themselves. Also helping these children know how to reinforce their own behavior or punish their own behavior. And you all know the example we've been talking about throughout the semester of creating a to-do list and really reinforcing yourself when you get something done on your to-do list, or even we call it pre-mac, where you do something like homework that maybe is not so much fun. And then you reward yourself for doing the homework by going out and playing. But you don't get to go out and play until you finish your homework. The pre-mac is that contingency. Okay. Other things that we do, particularly with parents and school teachers, and there's a book called 1-2-3 Magic. And 1-2-3 Magic is setting up a warning system for children where, let's say they're engaging in behavior that the adult figure doesn't like, and they're saying, I want you to stop doing that, you're at 1. And then if they keep doing it, I want you to stop doing that, you're at 2. So they get 2 warnings, and then at 3, they go to timeout. Because oftentimes ADHD kids need more than 1 warning. Okay. I remember when my kids were little and their cousins were visiting, I would have to give to my sons a very firm no, for certain things of like, no, you need to stop doing that. And my sweet little niece, I'll never forget this day when I hurt little Megan's feelings. She was doing something that wasn't that bad anyways, and I gave her a firm no, and she just broke down crying. And it was one of those like she just needed a Megan, stop that, kind of thing. And I was just used to the firm no, and poor little girl, she turned out to be a wonderful young woman, so I didn't damage her too much. Okay, so with this behavior modification and self-regulation, we try to be really comprehensive, again, in not just putting kids on a medication, but giving them skills and working with their school environment and working with their home environment to try to help best have these kids succeed. The medications that are used most commonly are the stimulant medications. And again, if the frontal lobe does not have the ability to inhibit, if you put a stimulant into the frontal lobe, it's like giving the brakes more sensitivity. That brain has the ability to inhibit behavior. It's the opposite of thinking about alcohol or using a sedative. Alcohol or a sedative is going to disinhibit the brain. Okay, stimulants are going to inhibit. Most common ones that you all have heard of, Ritalin, Adderall, Focalin, these are all the stimulants. These down here start to get into different families of drugs. Vyvanse actually started out as a blood pressure medication, and then a side effect was better attention in individuals, and so sometimes now it's marketed. All of these in here are going to increase the availability of dopamine in the brain. Strotera, on the other hand, is more of an atypical antidepressant. And so this one would be used if you've got an ADHD kind of overlay and more kind of depressive symptoms, but this is a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. And then ideally, and again, a good school psychologist, clinical psychologist is going to do this. At times, what you'll do is even trials where some days the child is, say, sent to school with the teacher monitoring the child on the medication. And some days the child is sent not on the medication to see if a parent or a school teacher really sees a noticeable difference in behavior on the days on the meds versus the days off the meds. Now, keep in mind, all of us, if we were to be, whether we have ADHD or not, all of us would be able to concentrate and hone in more carefully on a stimulant medication. So just because concentration improves on a stimulant, that is not diagnosable. We're not supposed to go backwards that way. Okay. It's kind of like many of you in here probably enjoy coffee, and coffee oftentimes helps us concentrate and helps us study better. It's a mild stimulant, milder than this kind of stuff. Any questions here? Okay. I want to show you this clip on using meditation as a treatment intervention for ADHD. So let me, and I gotta say, I love this kid's hair. You gotta check out the hair. The purpose of this is to watch the meditation intervention, but I love the hair.
Part of what we're doing, we're going to teach kids who have ADD to meditate and see how it helps them. Mm-hmm. And so I want to get a sense of how ADD affects you. So you have ADD?
Yes.
You know you got it?
Yes.
Okay. How can you tell?
Well, when I get frustrated, I get overly frustrated sometimes. When I can't do my work, I shut down too easily. And I sometimes just have problems overall working and just keeping my anger under control.
I can't all sit straight, like sit there for a while and not fidget. And I can't concentrate for a long time. I can get distracted easily.
Sometimes it's harder for me to read and pay attention in class.
Okay. And is that true at home too, or when you're trying to do homework? Or?
Yeah, trying to do homework is kind of tough too.
Let me ask you about, do you know what stress is?
Yes.
When you feel stressed, pressure, or tense?
I have a lot. I always have a lot.
A lot of stress?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about that. When do you feel stressed? How do you feel stressed?
It's mostly when I'm doing homework. Like I said, when I do something wrong, I could say I'm a lean, mean stress machine. It's helped me with my schoolwork, not getting as frustrated with my friends, and just not getting so angry with my parents, doing my homework better, not getting into so much fights at school, not getting people angry, and stuff like that.
It's kind of easier for me to focus and concentrate my energy on one thing than going in, trying to work on one thing and then fidgeting and trying to stop that and then listen to the teacher at the same time.
I'm much more calmer now than I used to be and less hyper and much more mature than I was. And now all my friends want me to come over their house.
Well, I don't stress as much anymore, unless it's like with my friends or whatever, but I don't stress that much anymore. So I'm basically, what it's doing is it's making me be able to focus so I'm not under stress.
Makes me a lot more confident in myself because then I know that if I can't get a few things, I don't need to get stressed out about it. I just need to take a little time, go to something else, and then come back to it and work on it.
It's working, it's improving their lives, it's improving their sense of self. It's empowering them. I mean, I can say that over and over again, but I really do see it making a big difference. And I think that their futures are going to be so much brighter because of it.
Part of what we're doing, we're going to teach kids who have
Any thoughts or comments on that? Okay, so big take-home point here is that for an accurate diagnosis, we've got a psychologist, school psychologist, clinical psychologist doing neuropsych testing, and then offering up recommendations for parent, teachers, child that involves counseling in addition to the medication. Okay. Some individuals dislike the medication, or the parents do not want to put their children on medication. And so they would be the more of the counseling only route. But where we don't want to do treatment as usual is just simply child goes to pediatrician and pediatrician starts the child on stimulant medication, because you might be missing out on a lot of other opportunities for treatment, a lot of opportunities to, if they're even on medication, keep the dosage as low as possible, as well as possibly missing out on other types of diagnoses that could be driving what looks like ADHD behavior. Okay. And we know from a treatment outcome that if we use the counseling and the other interventions like the meditation, like the behavior modification, like the self-regulation, that plus the medication, we're going to get the best outcomes. Okay. Okay. So just for funsies here at the end of today, when other forms of discipline for the child just is not enough, then we can calm our children by taking them for a drive. I'm sure you all have heard of that. Just put them in the car, take them for a drive, calm them down. Better than spanking. Okay. Okay, so today's lecture, short and sweet. Anybody have any questions before we get done? All right, y'all ready to take your exam? Soon? Soon? Yeah, feel free to take it early. You don't have to wait till Thursday if you want to get it out of the way. Okay, good to see everybody. We will reconvene. So Thursday is the exam. We will convene next Tuesday. Next lecture will be on suicide. Okay, bye everybody.